Okay, so we're back. We've already set up our direct lighting, so now it's time to set up some indirect lighting, and we're going to start off by using photons through global illumination, and we'll go on from there. So the next step is to take the lights that I've already created in my scene and have them emit photons and activate global illumination. So let's go ahead and let's do that. I'll open up an Explorer, and I'll grab all the lights, all 6 of them, and open up a shared PPG. And in the Photon tab, I want to make sure that global illumination is turned on. I'm going to take the number of emitted photons and I'm going to increase it to 100. Editor, there was a phone in the background. Edit that out of the video, starting again in 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to take the number of emitted photons here and I'm going to increase it to 100,000 so we get more photons. Of course, we're going to need a lot more photons than that when we do our final render. So since there's 6 lights, 6 times 100,000 is 600,000 photons. So we have less than a million, which will render relatively fast. Okay, so with that done, let me go ahead and close that. Going to say the first camera view point here. Let me also go to render or options. And for the render options, let me pin that down. I want to make sure that under the GI and Caustics tab, I have global illumination turned on. And under Photon Global, I want to make sure that I'm set to global illumination / final gather. We're not going to go over irradiance particles now. We'll go over that later. We're not going to turn on importance for the moment either. We're going to just leave it on rebuild. We're also going to rename our photon map here. I don't like the default name, so I'm just going to call it ArchViz pH map. So our photons are on, our global illumination is on, and it looks like we're ready to go. And we have our lights set to shoot global illumination photons in our scene. So let's do render preview and see what we get. Okay, so the render preview is finished. I'm going to lock it down. We could see the intensity of the light and the global illumination effect. Now, the global illumination effect is not very intense at all. We barely can notice the global illumination effect, which is obviously no good. So what's going on? Why is our global illumination coming out so dark? Well, the most logical thing to do in this case is to, let's go to the Explorer here. Let's go to say all the small window lights. I'm just going to use those as my test subjects for now. So I've got all the small window lights, this window, and the one behind the render preview. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a PPG for that. And in the photon section here, I can increase the energy color here to pure white to make it brighter. And I can increase the intensity. Right now it's set to only 10,000. So let's see what happens when I increase it to say 100,000. Okay? And let's do a new render. Okay, so let's compare side by side the two renders. The one on the left is the one before with an intensity of about, what was it, the default, which was like 10,000. And the render on the right is the render with the updated intensity of about 100,000. You'll notice though, there's no difference in intensity. They look exactly the same. How can they look the same if one of them has more intensity than the other? What's going on? Well, what's happening is that our photon intensity is being overridden. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let me go ahead and select one of these small lights. So I'll select small lights 2. And I'll open up its render tree. And we can see here's the portal light shader. It's actually connected right now to the light shader and the light photon emitter shader. That's the key. Okay? Because the portal light is hooked up to the photon emitter port of this light material here, what's happening is that the portal light is overriding and controlling the intensity of the photon effect. If we open up the portal light, we can see that we have no parameter for controlling the intensity of the photon effect. That's because the photon effect is being controlled by the multiplier. See, the multiplier is controlling not only the intensity for the actual portal light right now because it's plugged into this photon port here on the light, it's actually controlling both the direct light and the indirect light, the intensity of the photon effect. Okay, so there's two sides to that coin. Okay, on the one hand, this is great because it allows you to control the intensity of the light and the photons with just this one multiply parameter. So you don't have to worry about going back and forth to different PPGs or worrying about trying to match the intensities to look right. So I would say this is more physically plausible. This is more realistic and it's probably a better workflow. Okay, so if you want the photon effect to be brighter, go ahead and increase the multiplier of the light, of the portal light. Okay, if you want separate control and you don't really care about the physical correctness, or you really don't want to control the photon intensity and the light intensity from this parameter here in the portal light, what you can do is you can go to the preset manager and make sure you're in the light category. Grab yourself a regular soft light shader. This is the default soft light shader that is created for you automatically when you create a new light in XSI. Take the soft light shader and plug it into the photon emitter shader port of the light. And now what will happen is, if I go back to the light photon tab here and the PPG, when I change the intensity, it'll change the intensity of the photon effect separately, which is the default behavior of regular standard lights. Video editor, video editor. It's Microsoft acting up stupid again. Edit that out of the video, edit that out of the video. We'll start again in 3, 2, 1. So if you want to control your intensity of photons separately, use a soft light shader and plug it into the photon port of the light. Okay, that's what I'm going to do here just to demonstrate this. The intensity is set to 100,000. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that PPG, close that render tree, and I'm going to create another render and we're going to see the difference. Okay, so it's a little bit difficult to see, but the photon effect is a lot brighter now for this light at this window behind the couch right there. That's the light that I just updated and changed using the render tree. Okay, and if you really want to see the drastic effect of this, what I would recommend is come in here and increase that intensity to a super high amount, like 400,000, 500,000, something like that. And then you're really going to see the difference. Okay, so I'm going to close that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the portal light to control the intensity of my photons. So I just deviated there a little bit just to show you that little tip right there, little production technique. So now you can control your photon intensity separately or through just the portal light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all my small window lights here, open up their shared PPG. Increasing the intensity again right here in the photon tab is not going to make a difference. What I need to do is go to the multiplier here and increase it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to increase it to, say, let's try 1500. So that's going to be a much higher intensity than it was before. And let's create a render preview here and see what we get. Okay, so it's not finished rendering, but you can see so far it's looking pretty good. The room looks much brighter, looks much nicer. I like this. I like nicely lit rooms like this. So that looks pretty good. And then later when we introduce final gathering, it's going to clean this up and make this look even nicer. Very cool. Awesome. So let me close that. So that's how the photons work with the portal light. Alright. So over here, let me see if these lights need any changes here. Global illumination's fine here. Let me check out this light over here. This one is not too bad. Pretty good. Okay, looks pretty neat. So now the next thing I'm going to do is come back to my render options up here. And I'm going to go back to GI and Caustics, and I'm going to increase the accuracy all the way to 5000. This really isn't going to increase rendering time by too much, if at all, and it's going to give us a better global illumination map. I'm going to leave the photon search radius at the default, which is 2.5, which works out pretty good for the scene. The smaller the search radius, the more accurate your lighting solution is going to be when it comes to global illumination photons. But the more photons you're going to need, or else you're going to end up with some nasty blotching effects with the lighting and some stains and stuff like that. So be careful and be aware of that. Smaller the radius, the better, but you're going to need more photons. The larger the radius, the worse your accuracy, but you need less photons. In this case, I'm going to leave it at default. The merge factor is fine at 1. I'm going to leave it at 1. This is basically a factor that Mentoray uses to decide how it's going to merge photons together. The higher this number is going to be, the less accuracy you're going to have, but the less blotching you're going to have, and the better it's actually going to look, the global illumination effect. I'm going to leave it at the default of 1, which is fine. I'm going to go back to Photon Global here, And now I'm going to go ahead and turn on Importans. Okay, so the default settings for Importans, as I said in the previous section of this tutorial before we started working on this ArchViz scene, are actually pretty good. The merge distance of 0.2, the density of 1 is pretty good, and trace through geometry is pretty good too. So I'm going to leave those how they are. However, I want you to be aware of the merge distance. For most scenes, a merge distance of 0.2 will actually work pretty good. For this specific scene, it's not going to work out too well. We're going to have a little bit of light artifacts and some black spots and things like that, and little dark stains around detailed areas of our scenes, mainly in areas where there's little corners and things. Like, for example, if I come over here to this, let me see if I can select that window frame right there. There we go. Areas like this window frame that have these edges and things, and these corners where it touches the wall here, corners, stuff like that. Places where it's harder for photons to get into are going to have little black stains and things like that, little artifacts with a merge distance of 0.2 or higher, which obviously is no good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the merge distance even more to 0.05, which is a very small merge distance, but it's going to give us a more accurate and much nicer result, and it's going to get rid of that artifacting and those nasty little black splotches that we would otherwise get if we used a larger merge distance. Okay, and then down here, the diffuse balances, the default is set to 0. For this case, I'm going to stick with 0, and the reason for that is actually pretty simple. I already have a whole bunch of photons bouncing around in this scene, and then on top of that, I'm going to add final gather later. So I already have all of the diffuse bounces and the indirect illumination that I really need. I don't need to add some diffuse bounces to my importans. If I do, the only difference it's going to make is that more indirect diffuse bounces of light are going to be taken into consideration when Mentoray calculates the importans. But it's not going to make much of a difference because, like I said, I already have a lot of indirect diffuse bounces in the scene because of the photons themselves, and of course because of final gathering, which I'll add later. So I don't need to waste time rendering, calculating extra diffuse bounces, and wasting time slowing down the importans calculation. So I'm going to leave it at 0. If you want to increase it, that's fine, but you're not going to see too much of a difference in your render, and it might not be worth the added rendering time to add more diffuse bounces. So just keep that in mind. I will leave the trace through geometry option turned on. This is a really good thing to do when using importans with global illumination, because what will happen is that the importans will actually go through objects and sample surfaces that are past objects that are not visible to the camera, which in our case can be pretty good because it can give us a much nicer and more accurate lighting solution as opposed to the importans being blocked by, again, video editor, Microsoft freaking Windows. Edit that out of the video, starting again, 3, 2, 1. As opposed to having our importans being blocked by objects in our scene. I don't want the importans being blocked because then you have too many dark spots, and that's not what I want. I want a nice indirect illumination effect. Okay, so I have my importans turned on. My global illumination is turned on. I got my accuracy set to 5,000, okay, which is not too bad. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to increase the amount of photons in my scene. Alright, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and open up an Explorer window here. I'm going to select all of my lights, so all 6 lights. Open up a shared PPG over here. And I probably already had one here that was collapsed, but oh well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I'll go to the Photon tab, and for the number of emitted photons, I want to really increase this because I'm ready to make myself a nice global illumination map here. So I'm going to increase this to 500,000. Okay, I'm going to 500,000. I'm not going to do millions and millions of photons, although 500,000 times 6 is going to come out to millions of photons anyway. But I don't want to do, like, say 5 million photons per light because it's just going to slow me down a lot, and I really don't need it because I'm going to use Final Gather to clean up the global illumination / important solution later. Okay, so let me pick a spot. I could either pick this one or even this one over here or this one. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go with this one right here. I like this camera view. I don't know why, but this part of the scene here looks pretty interesting, at least to me anyways. So you can use whatever camera view you want. I'm going to go with this one. So with this view right here, let me just double check my render settings here. I'm set to rebuild. I've renamed my photon map file, and I have my portents set to a density of 1. I don't want to set it lower to 1. I want it to be set to 1 so that I have a lot of importance per pixel. And I don't want to go over 1 because 1 is actually more than enough. And if we increase the density amount, we're just going to end up adding a lot of unnecessary render time to mental ray when we really don't need it. And a density of 1 is actually going to look really, really nice, high quality. Okay, merge distance I lowered to 0.05 so I get a more accurate result. And diffuse bounces, like I said before, I don't need more than the default diffuse bounce, so I'm going to leave it at 0. And trace through geometry, I want it on. That way objects that are behind other objects and can't be seen by the camera, even though they're in the field of view of the camera, will have importance calculated for it, which is a good thing. Okay, I'm not going to turn on final gathering just yet. First I'm going to calculate my global illumination photon map. So let's go ahead and let's do that now. I'm just going to go ahead and render. So I'll leave this rendering because I'm rendering with a lot more photons now. You will notice that the photon emission takes a lot longer to calculate now. And you can see the importance actually calculated pretty quick. So the default options look good and render pretty fast. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to pause the video and I'll come back when this thing finishes rendering. Okay, so just finished rendering. Like I said, it took a little bit longer than before, simply because it's just a lot more photons to have to take into account. But that's okay. Alright, so now that we have the photon solution done at an accuracy of 5,000 and we have our importance and everything, let's turn rebuild off. That way it doesn't rebuild over and over and over again. Okay, well this video has been going on for a pretty long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop it here, and in the next video we'll pick up and keep chipping away at this scene.